Let's play d4. Okay. Let's play Catalan. I really don't mind. I do play the Catalan. I mean, I have played it before. Now, assuming that black... Yep, okay. So we play the Catalan. And maybe that way I'll talk a little bit about the white side of the Catalan. Now, again, I'm not too qualified to talk about this. I've played the Catalan a fair amount of times for both colors. Okay, so this is the main line, a6. Okay, a6. So a6 is the first surprise. The sort of traditional main line is d takes c4 in this position. And I'll show you this after the game. But dc is the most popular line. a6 clearly prepares dc. It's clear to me that black is preparing to take on c4 and to follow that up with the move b5. So it is worthwhile in this position to protect the c4 pawn. And if you study the Catalan, you will know that the way that you normally protect that pawn, the first line of defense is the move queen to c2, because this doesn't obstruct the development of the other pieces. So knight c6 is already kind of a mistake, I think. Knight c6 prevents black from ever being able to push the c-pawn. We just talked about this, and it gives us like an ideal Catalan structure. Okay, so the other good thing about playing queen c2 is that it vacates the d1 square, and it's a very good idea in the Catalan to put a rook on d1. Even if the center does not open, you have to make sure that your d4 pawn is well defended. So I like the idea of playing rook d1 in this position. Notice how we're delaying the development of our kingside, of our queenside pieces, because I don't know yet exactly where I want to put the bishop and the knight. I want to see how black positions his pieces first. Okay, knight b4. Well, knight b4 is not scary. We're just going to play queen b3. My guess is that black is going to take and go b5. Maybe I shouldn't have allowed that. I don't know. b5, yeah. I suppose that I should have maybe played knight b to d2, actually, to meet dc with knight takes c4. Somehow this escaped my attention. It's not the end of the world. We go queen back to b3. We just get a normal Catalan position. I think white is still a little better. Okay, so now let's get the knight out. Now it's obvious where we need to develop, right? And here it's obvious that we don't want to go knight bd2. That's a ridiculous move. So we go knight c3. And very often in these types of positions, the battle revolves around the question of whether black will be able to push c5. Like if black pushes c5 and trades the d4 pawn for the c5 pawn, the position is at the very least going to be equal. If black does not manage to do it, the c-pawn becomes backward, and our control of the center is superior, right? Because we have a pawn in the center and black doesn't. So you get this very complex positional battle where black tries to get c5 in and white makes all these moves to prevent c5. Sometimes you see the bishop even coming out to e3 in these positions. Don't be surprised if you do. That's a way to discourage c5. Knight d5 by our opponent. Okay. So we should keep a couple of things in mind. We need to prevent c5 at all costs. Not at all costs, but like it would not be very good if black got a chance to play this move. So let's think about how we can do that. Well, I've got an idea. And I'm borrowing from what I know about the Catalan, because taking on d5 makes some sense here. No, e4 is bad. E4 is bad because black takes on c3 and then you drop the pawn. Yeah, knight e5 is really interesting, but I'm afraid that black can simplify with knight takes c3. And I'm not overly enthralled with that. My inclination was to play bishop g5. Yeah, a4 is interesting too, but then black can play b4. I would like us to play bishop g5. Now, this is a developing move, but essentially, how am I trying to discourage c5? What I'm trying to do is to take on f6 at some point. And my point is that black's bishop is going to be overloaded. The bishop defends c5. The bishop also defends f6. And if after c5, bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, then we can take on c5 with a discovery. I think h6 is inaccurate. And what we're going to do is actually take this knight on f6 preemptively. Bishop takes f6. And what very nice positional move are we going to play now? Again, we are trying to focus all of our energy on preventing c5. If possible, once and for all, we go knight e4, and now we have an advantage. No question about it. Bishop takes f6 was a mistake. And we're going to go rook ac1, and we're going to stick a knight on c5, and we are going to pressure black down the c file for the rest of the game. And this is where the Catalan gets to be such a nasty opening to face. When you get a position like this, which I've gotten before, The other knight, by the way, can jump out to e5. Absolutely. Can jump out to e5. And then maybe even to c6. So again, just like in the previous game with that move bishop g6, right? We don't necessarily rush with knight c5. We can play that move when we want to play it. We have done the job of preventing black from playing c5. So on the next move, it would make sense for us to also consider the move knight e5, as I was saying. Knight b6. Okay, well, now that kind of forces our hand. It forces us to make a decision between knight c5 but what I really like is the move knight e5. I love the move knight e5 because it defends the knight with the bishop, and it piles on the pressure, it activates the other knight, and we are not really afraid of bishop d5, which I would imagine black will play. I mean, bishop d5 just attacks the queen, but we can drop the queen back to c2. And obviously the a2 pawn is going to be untouchable there because we have b3, trapping the bishop. Yeah, so also notice how we are restricting black's knight and not permitting it to jump out to c4. Not that that would be such a dangerous move anyway, but still. No, if black plays f5, I mean, that's unthinkable because the e6 pawn is going to hang with check. Bishop d5, there we go. So let's drop our queen back to c2. We drop our queen back to c2. We are threatening now to capture on c7. And everything in the Catalan happens slowly, right? We're not going to win this game in 2 seconds. Black is still quite solid, but you can see how much he's suffering. Knight c4. Okay, now it's time for us to transform our advantage. The big question is, should we take on c4? We have an interesting alternative. We have several interesting alternatives, but to my eyes, the answer probably is yes, because black has no good way to recapture. BC, come on, look at these weaknesses. But we need to be very precise here. And here's the thing. My initial idea is to say, okay, this pawn on c4 seems to be black's weakest pawn. So if you think about how to attack it, you get the idea of moving the knight back to d2. But if you calculate concretely, after knight d2, what happens? There is a flaw with that move. There's a flaw with that move. Black takes on g2, and then our pawn on d4 is going to be hanging because we're intercepting the rook's connection to that pawn. So rather than getting discouraged, we just ask ourselves, can we troubleshoot that at the start of the line so that we don't have to deal with the hanging d4 pawn? Well, the answer to that question is yes. We just play the move e3. And on the next move, we are going to drop the knight back to d2. We are not afraid of bishop takes e4. I know some of you might think, well, can't black take the knight? Yeah, but then we just take back, and the c4 pawn is even weaker in that instance. So the move e3, very patient prophylactic move, and a preparatory move. And hopefully my moves are making sense so far at a high level. This is why I hesitate to play an opening like the Catalan and the Speedrun, because it's so conceptually complicated that even I don't understand 90% of the main ideas. There is now queen d7 to defend the pawn. Queen d7 doesn't defend the pawn. Okay, rook b8. So black aims at the b2 pawn. I don't think this move actually does anything, though. So I think we can very safely drop the knight back to d2. Oh, we are definitely willing to trade bishops. I don't mind trading bishops. Our king is going to be fine. Black, remember, has almost no pieces left. I mean, there are no minor pieces left. So trading the Catalan bishop is not as uncommon as you might think. This is fine. And you should never make a move just because, I don't like trading this particular type of piece. You should consider it more concretely. Another thing that we should troubleshoot, we should understand that if black keeps the status quo, if black makes a move like queen d7, it might not be the wisest idea to take on c4 immediately. We should at least calculate it before we play that move. Because imagine that in this position it was white to move, and we would play knight takes c4. Black can take that knight. After queen takes c4, black can take the pawn on b2, restoring material equality. But now that I think about that line, in that final position after rook takes b2, which pawn can white take? And there's one pawn that you should take and one pawn that you should not. Which pawn should we take in that position? Yes, we should take the pawn on a6 for 2 reasons. The first is that it gives us an outside passer, and a very, very scary one at that. The second is that queen takes c7 allows rook takes a2, and black seems to keep the balance there. Does that make sense? So we are indeed threatening to take on c4 with the knight. There's very little that black can do about that. I mean, if I were black, I would consider the move a5. which is a crazy prophylactic move, but you understand, hopefully, why I would consider it. Because then after knight c4, bishop c4, queen c4, rook b2, the pawn is not capturable. So think about what white might do if black plays a5. He doesn't play it. He takes it, goes queen d5. And that's like clearly a defeated type of sequence, because now he's going to lose this pawn and the other queenside pawns are going to be in bad shape as well. And what stands before us now is just a pretty straightforward conversion. No, we're doing fantastic. This is like a Catalan player's dream. Probably c5 is the lesser evil for black. Black should play c5. At least you might get rid of another weakness, because if we take on c4 and black still has this pawn sitting there, we might actually win a second pawn shortly thereafter. What I often find at these levels is that once you lose a pawn, once one side starts to decline, it doesn't take long for more mistakes to appear on the board. But kudos to our opponent. c5 is played. Let's play dc, opening up the d file first and foremost, and then take on c4 on the next move. And we will have simply a 2-on-1 on the queen side, and that'll be that. Black is also getting quite low on time. Okay, if bishop c5, we can even consider knight e4, but okay, I don't see a point of that. I think we should just play knight takes c4. I've never played the Catalan before in a speedrun, so I hope you're enjoying this little foray into the forbidden opening. Yeah, and I'll go over some of the typical ideas after the game as well, because I really only glanced through some of the core concepts. Even if you don't play the Catalan, even if you're not a d4 player, I would suggest that you listen carefully, because these are foundational positional ideas that you really need to learn, if you want to be a good positional player. And some people advocate the slightly radical approach of actually choosing an opening that you don't like and playing it for a couple of months deliberately in order to force yourself to learn a bunch of important positional ideas. I don't think you should go that far, but this is kind of the same style. Yeah, I've heard that recommended by some coaches, actually. Knight takes c4. Now we're going to win this on time. I can sense that black is not aware of his clock. Okay, rook fc8. Okay, so what should we do here? Well, here I think that what we should say is, okay, our knight on c4 is very nice. It's a good knight. It's sort of controlling a lot of the queenside squares. We shouldn't move the knight. Let's defend it. You guys are on the ball. b3 is a good, solid, sort of Russian schoolboy kind of move. Now we don't have to worry about any tactics connected with the knight. And our next move, if given the opportunity, is going to be rook to d7. We're going to start infiltrating, winding our tentacles around black's position. Okay, a5. So clearly black is trying to play a4. That's not particularly scary. I mean, b takes a4 would be possible there, but that would remove the defender of the knight. I wouldn't play a4 here, because that creates a big weakness on b3. So let's think for a second. I have an interesting idea. I would like to find a prophylactic move against a4. I wouldn't necessarily want to. Ooh, I have a really cool concept. I have a really cool idea. We're going to play the move. Weird looking move. Queen d2. Okay, so you should see that you're attacking the a5 pawn. I really hope that black plays a4 here, because I have a super cool response in mind to that move. And after rook a8, yes. Does anybody see what I have in mind? I love these moves because they don't look that beautiful, but they're cool. Knight b2, exactly. You drop the knight back and you win the pawn on a4. Nothing special, but it's nice. We win a second pawn and we win the game. Okay, so 10 seconds for black. It's over. Cool stuff. Yeah, only 28 moves. This was a pretty short game. No, but I don't know why our opponent is just not even moving. Okay, great. So the Catalan, right? The Catalan, you can enter the Catalan through a bunch of different move orders. Like you can play g3 first. You can play one knight f3 and two g3, right? Everybody should understand that the Catalan arises through a gazillion different move orders. And the Catalan is characterized by this position. This move g3 in this position is actually what the Catalan is. So the first thing that makes the Catalan almost impossible to study is just the amount of different setups that black has. You might think, oh, I play the knight earth, I'm not afraid of a couple of different lines. This isn't a couple. Black has about 15 different viable setups, continuations, lines in every one of these positions. Like here, there are a bunch of alternatives. There's DC. DC itself isn't just one line. It's a million lines. No, I don't know. I know maybe like 3% of Catalan theory. So here, there's check. There is A6. There's knight C6. There's C5, bishop B4. All of these have over 1,000 games on Opening Explorer. Bishop D7 is huge. C6 is huge. And of course, there's bishop E7, which transposes into what I'm about to tell you. So other than that, there is bishop B4 check, C6 and C5. And after bishop E7 and castles, there is C6 here, which is a huge line. And there is DC, which is a line that people couldn't find what to do against for the longest time. And every one of these lines has to be studied very carefully. And even after DC Queen C2, there is this new move, B5, that Hikaru has been playing a lot. There's the traditional move, A6. There's B6. There's like it's just an unbelievable amount of theory. But let alone the theory, conceptually, it's also ridiculously complicated. Like all of these ideas and concepts that you have to know, and you have to understand how to play down a pawn when black goes B5. So I'm not really doing a good sales pitch for the Catalan, but it's a tremendously complex opening. So our opponent played A6, which is a rare move. It's not the best. It's not the best because it allows us to get the queen out to C2. Or I guess it's fine because I guess it's not the best the way he played it. But if black plays DC here, then it transposes back into the most popular line of the Catalan, which is queen takes C4. Now, recently, the move A4 has become even more popular than queen takes C4. But the old main line is queen takes C4, B5, queen C2, and bishop B7. And in the old days, like 80s and 90s, almost everybody used to play bishop D2. This is still the main move. And as black, almost everybody would play bishop B4, queen C1, and bishop back to B7. And obviously, a ton of games ended in this repetition. But at some point, this line was like all the rage, and Kramnik was playing it and stuff. Later on, people started discovering alternatives in this position. And then at some point, this move C6 became incredibly popular, super computerish move. I've played it with black. So, so the theory of this of the Catalan has evolved through the years. And recently, I would say A4 has overtaken queen takes C4 in popularity. And I think black has struggled to equalize against A4. The idea is to prevent B5, of course. But I think our opponent's first serious mistake was knight C6. And here I made a counter mistake. I didn't realize that knight B4 was an idea. So if I did, I would probably play the move knight B to D2 here. And you might say, well, I don't get it. How does that stop this idea with knight B4? Well, the problem is that you can just drop the queen back to B1. And if black sort of obstinately goes for the same line, you probably already have tactics here with like knight F E5 attacking the rook in the corner. And then maybe the other knight could swing out to A5 and then to C6. And this gets really, really nasty for black. So I'm pretty sure that knight BD2 would have been the most accurate move. We played rook D1, allowing black to resort back to this idea of taking on C4 and going B5. There's actually 2 games in the database here. I wonder, 2300, 2400 and 2400. So this position has occurred in some high-level games after knight C3. Yeah, even knight BD5 has been played once. And bishop G5 apparently is the novelty. So after bishop G5, I think a critical position arises. And here our opponent made a series of mistakes that stems from not understanding the position. If you understand that the C5 square is the critical square, then I think you're tempted to play knight takes C3. Now, there's also tactics here. Queen takes C3 does not work. And the reason it does not work is because of knight E4. Bishop E7 takes, and unfortunately you lose the rook, and then the knight evacuates via B2. So white has to play BC, which is less than desirable because it damages the pawn structure. And what would you guys propose here for black? What should black do in this position? Well, C5, but did you consider DC? Yeah, actually C5 might be good. DC, and now simply queen C7. And now simply queen C7. And I don't think that white can defend this pawn. And I think that black is totally fine. So I think this would have equalized. C5 and black is fine. Now, maybe white can play A4. Shroom, you were suggesting this move in a different position. Yeah, bishop D5 here is also probably fine. Yeah, bishop D5 here is also probably fine. Yeah, so I think I made a serious mistake in allowing the move knight B4 and then DC and B5, because our queen ends up making a gazillion moves, so we waste a bunch of tempi. Knight C3, bishop G5. So H6 actually helps us do what we want to do anyway. And now another mistake. Black definitely has to take with a knight. Definitely has to take with a knight in order to prevent us from getting our knight to E4. Why is that something that black needs to prevent? Because if white clamps down on the C5 square, I think we've already all established that black is much worse. Now, what would I have done here? Probably we would have played the move knight to E5. The interesting thing in the Catalan is that it's often a good idea for white to trade the Catalan bishop, which sounds crazy if you hear it for the first time. But look at this C6 square. That's a serious weakness. This knight's a big strength. And white's pieces are just better placed. I mean, we're just more active. We're just generally more active. So unless black can get C5 in here, which maybe he can, maybe this works, DC queen C7. Black is liable to be quite a bit worse in these types of positions. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, maybe C5 works. We could also play rook AC1. We could take the calmer approach and improve the positioning of our rook. That's also fine, rook AC1. So I think white's slightly better here. But after bishop F6, knight E4, we are much better. I mean, it really, that is how big the difference is. When black is not even close to playing C5, then white is much, much better. So after knight E4, black can never play C5. We increase our control over the position of the rook AC1. We put the other knight on E5, and at this point, the pressure almost grows unbearable. Bishop D5, queen C2, attacking C7. And after knight C4, knight takes C4, already black is in huge trouble. Because if he had taken with the bishop, then I think we have the simple move B3. For starters, bishop D5 and queen takes C7, snags the pawn. BC, we play the move E3. This is a very important move, because not only does it solidify the center, but it prepares the move knight D2. And again, if we had played knight D2 immediately, then we would have dropped the pawn on D4. So you prepare it with the move E3, then you move the knight back to D2. You don't care about the trade of bishops. You take on C5, we win the pawn, and then queen D2 is a super nice move. It attacks the pawn, If A4, then knight B2 wins the other pawn. And if black had played rook A8, we have this very pretty tactic, knight takes A5. Queen takes A5, rook takes C8 check, overloaded rook, and white wins the game. So yeah, this was a pretty nice introduction to the Catalan, I think. Who said there's going to be one more game? I don't know about that. It's pretty late, so there's so much more I could talk about in the Catalan. That's why I don't like these openings, because I feel like I'm not really scratching even the surface of this opening. What about queen D7 as last move? Oh, instead of knight B2? Well, here black can play AB, though. What is your idea? You're not threatening the bishop. So, and if you play knight D6, then you allow queen takes C1. You have to remember this concept. What about knight F4 after rook C1? So we played rook C1 here. Oh, look at that suggestion. That's super interesting. I didn't see this move. I did not see this move. This was very interesting. Now, I don't think that it solves any of black's problems. We still go knight E5. And this structure is actually not that bad. And I think you know this. This structure is not that bad. And we're still preventing C5. A great catch. And maybe that was black's best chance to play something like that. A question about whether black can play the Catalan structure. Not really. There is no equivalent reverse opening that I know of. Of course, some of the ideas can be applied, but not the opening itself. You might know that Boris Averuk, who is a friend of mine, he's a very strong grandmaster. He wrote 2 very well-received books on 1d4. He is considered a Catalan expert. So he's basically written the Catalan Bible. Now, his original 1d4 book is kind of outdated at this point, but he's updated it. And, you know, if you want to learn the Catalan, you want to take on the gauntlet, Averuk's book is, in my opinion, the gold standard. That's where you should start. But I don't recommend it. I just, if you can be a D4 player, that's fine. But my recommendation under 2200, and I've made this very clear, is the Carlsbad C takes D5 against the Queen's Gambit declined. This is my recommendation officially. Or if you want to play the London, you can play the London. That's also fine. All right, guys. Thank you all. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you had a good time.